time at home has been great because I've been able to really figure out, like, Caroline, what do you want?
Mm-hmm.
What do you want? And what are the action steps to get there? Very simply, rather than like it's like everything that's happening in the world is kind of forcing us to return to this grounding energy. Like, what really matters? What do we really want? Who are we really?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very grateful for that time, for sure, to just kind of pause, write this down, look at it in like a graph. What are my priorities? What comes first? I'm 31. I want this. I want this. I want this. Cool. Let's go.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Oof.
Woo! Okay. Well, I am very excited for this. I don't even know. We did our part 1 of this was last year. I forget when, but that's before we even started coaching together.
Before we started coaching, before we met too.
Yeah.
So it was certainly earlier in the year.
It was. Yeah. I remember we talked on the phone, we did the podcast, and then I was like, cool, will you be my mentor and friend forever?
And I was like, absolutely. By design.
Amazing. Yeah. It's so funny to think back on, but there's a lot happening in the world. There's a lot happening that I want to touch on. So before we jump into it, let's just take a few breaths together. We're going to just take some, like, inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 8.
Okay.
So just get comfy and cozy. Anybody listening can join us unless you're driving. Don't do that. Just let your eyes close. Let the muscles of your face just soften. Letting go of any tension that's living in the body. Giving yourself full permission to be still. To let this moment and this conversation be enough. And take a big breath in through your nose. And clear it away, open the mouth. And then inhale for 4. Hold for 4. Full exhale for 8. Press the belly button towards the spine. And 3 more like that. Inhale for 4. Hold, relax the body. And exhale for 8. Two more. Inhale for 4, deep into the belly. Hold at the top. Soften the face. And exhale for 8. Full exhale. And last one. Inhale for 4. Hold at the top. Take in a little bit more air. And then let everything go. Full exhale for 8 seconds. And then just come back to your normal breath. Feeling just a little bit more grounded, a little bit more in your body. Take a big inhale through the nose. And let any remaining tension go. And then just bring your awareness back to your physical body, back to the chair you're sitting in, back to the space around you, the temperature of the air on your skin. And just let your eyes blink open to the screen in front of you. Take your time. And here we are. Beautiful. I was like, as we were getting ready for this, I was like, cool, get ready to connect in the virtual temple. And then I was like, wait, that's Dez's language. Like, I straight up learned that from you.
I feel like, so as you know, I do a lot of work with the Sophia coach, shout out to Kyra. And she nails what's actually happening within the circulation sharing of language, which is oracular activism, right? And empowerment. And so language is coded and it holds a vibration. And so my intent to access the purest vibratory tone that benefits myself and everyone else involved means that I want to attune with language that will circulate.
Yeah.
That we learn from one another and learn of ourselves from using, you know? And so what resonates with you to share, to circulate, to take on, to innovate, please do. You know, I think that is a symptom or a function of high level sisterhood and the intention of sort of when we use the word coven, you know what I mean? We are talking about having such an intimacy of sisterhood and connection that what is mine is yours and what is yours is mine. And having an awareness of balance and an awareness, especially when it comes to business and intellectual property, et cetera. But not everything needs to be so scrutinized around sort of the boundaries versus the technology that's available to us in that. So you girl, all that to say.
Noted, appreciated. I mean, there's so much to continue our conversation from last time, things to touch on, and it's such a powerful year. But I would love to kick things off by just reading this quote that I literally read this morning from one of my favorite books by Tara Brach. This could get us into the vibe of the conversation. So
love it.
Here it is. The most insidious messages of badness are those embedded in our society. Cultures are organized around stories of good and bad, right versus wrong, superior versus inferior, and they invoke shame to varying degrees in all of us. These stories target the way we treat each other, how much we earn, what we consume, the shape of our body, how we express creativity, our spiritual or religious beliefs, our gender, the color of our skin. Social shame served human evolution by enforcing cohesiveness in early tribes, and it can still alert us to behavior that threatens our belonging, but it has a very big shadow. Society's messages about the proper role and behavior of women, about the inferior status of people of color, about the unnaturalness of non-heterosexual orientations, and more, continue to cause horrific shame, oppression, injustice, and suffering. That to me, exhale. I read it this morning and I feel like I opened the book to that page and it was just like, read me. You know, I have chills even just saying that. And I feel that there is so much in her words there that is relevant and that I want to touch on with you. And I already feel like deep gratitude for this conversation before we've even had it. How are you feeling as we move through all of this, the awakening?
Just to even go back to what you just read, it immediately had me start to like just channel things and write things down. So just to speak to that for a second, that quote is exactly why our joy embodied, our prosperity, spiritually, financially, mentally, emotionally, is revolutionary. Because we are the direct recipients of such systematic oppressions at varying levels. The reclamation, the transcendence happens within. That is why. And it sounds like a colloquialism at this point because of the way that we've sort of whitewashed ancient and or indigenous spiritual understanding that does then equal to the measure that you just spoke to in that quote, also guideline the life that we live, how we treat each other, how we accept ourselves, how we embody the gifts that we're coming to give, how we allow ourselves to prosper from those gifts. And in that way, contribute to a sustainable economy of kindness and empathy and care, and where that is infinitely more sustainable. So I really love that you are setting the tone for this conversation. from that premise, because where I am is in a place of leveling up my impact leadership and getting to know the self that is so prepared for right now, and delineating time to learn that self and then also exact and execute from that sense of self. You know, so much like anybody else right now, I am learning, unlearning, growing, thriving, and renegotiating the terms of what success and thriving really is for me right now. And then obviously facilitating safe and brave space for my clients to do the same thing for themselves, for their families, for their circle of friends, and for their clients and their business. You know, I think that is the common denominator that we're all experiencing, and then having a unique experience within that.
Absolutely. And it's incredible to me just reading through those words, you know, how to me it feels very obvious. These constructs, these ideas that we've lived by and we've been taught to live by, you know, whether that be directly, indirectly, subconsciously, whatever, that they're so apparently real, and that there are a lot of people out there that are just denying them, that cannot access that level of reality that is this.
Well, I want to give credit to the fact that when we do the work, the inner work, we do become more sensitive to that which is an illusion, right? And where inner work is also held within the context of access and accessibility, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we give ourselves credit for doing the work and advancing our awareness in certain capacities, but also that advanced awareness does need to be able to lend to an empathy to the very real blocks that cause denial, the very real function of denying something, the survival, the trauma response that denial is. Right? And so to me, those that are denying this reality also have not had access to the opportunity to advance their awareness. I do believe that when most people are given the opportunity to know better and do better, that they do. And so
what a beautiful thing to say. It's just, it really is. I mean, just it's such a beautiful thing to just be like, you know what, regardless, like grace for the people, for their human experience, for where they're at. Like that's it.
And let me tell you how exhaustion and being oppressed and being marginalized and being a queer Black woman will bring you to the altar of grace. And where one needs to be able to evaluate how can I what is the best way of emotionally practicing my awareness of this thing so that I stay in my body and I can be of the most service to myself and a sustainable resource moving forward, right? And so this took time, and I have my own levels of denial, which, to go back to your question, even from our advanced awareness to an extent, there are ever more advanced levels of awareness that we can have that are in no competition with one another, but rather where we've unlocked a new level of grace, empathy, and compassion that allows us to have a higher vibrational perception. But that does not make us impervious to our own levels of denial. You know, all of this breaking open, the socio-political movement of the Black liberation movement, the LGBTQIA liberation movement, things that I was prepared to go my whole life denying just a little bit so that I could thrive and prosper more than enough to make the changes in those communities from that sense of mastering the intersection within the matrix of patriarchal capitalism, heteronormative, all of that. And to see this busting open, sis, I was prepared to do something that I no longer have to do. If that doesn't bring me back to the drawing board of that which I had to deny in order to become this successful so far, and the tremendous amount of incongruence with myself that was a part of that denial.
Yeah.
You know, in order to survive, and in order to more than survive, in order to thrive, some of those things were important. And that too is where the snag came in, and what we were talking about earlier around people really, especially high performance entrepreneurs, even the heart-centered ones, are nursing our hustle hangovers. All of us.
Questioning why they were there in the first place.
Questioning, challenging, grieving, feeling some real rage and betrayal about those things, you know? Yes.
Yeah, it's incredible to me that, you know, these constructs, these ideas, this level of denial in all people in many different forms is a form of like keeping us safe. And so it's like you're saying, survival. So it's very hard to move past that from like the ground level because yeah. And that's what's happening. You know, that the word like dismantling, awakening, the breaking open, like you said. Is that what you feel is happening?
For myself or everyone, or what? What do you mean?
Both.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You know, we sort of have this casual culture around really profound things like astrology, which demonstrates it demonstrates our connectivity with all that is. And yet we're surprised when we're called to dismantle within our own personal lives that which is upholding the collective structures that need to be dismantled.
Yeah.
And where out of conditioning and complacency as a part of that conditioning, we feel like we can choose to lean out or opt out of doing that kind of work and still not be held accountable for being complicit in upholding those structures, those collective structures, by upholding it within ourselves, by not challenging it within ourselves. You know, so absolutely. Yeah. We're all being brought to the altar at the same time. And I think that that's the biggest difference right now with this tipping point, different than in its own glorious way from any other glorious tipping point that we've seen or not seen, but heard about, or that the earth is holding the score around and showing us evidence that we had a little something to do with. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, I feel that. You know, I feel so much, questioning so much, unlearning, dismantling, understanding ways in which I've contributed to things that I would be like, no, I didn't contribute to that, but being like, I did, you know, and just looking that in the face and moving through that. And before we, you know, transition the conversation into more about like wellness, the wellness industry, and like decolonizing wellness, which you've been speaking about a lot lately, talking about allyship and, you know, what it looks like, what it really looks like. And there's like a lot of talk right now about like performative allyship. And I'm the first to admit, like, I'm so worried about being about that, you know? And so, and unlearning, like, what is the most important thing as an ally to be unlearning, to be doing?
So I first want to say that when terms are in negotiation, looking for a certain level of solidity is inappropriate. And so we're still figuring shit out right now. And if we're really on our job, we will continue to keep figuring things out. And so my word is not gospel, the gospel. It's one voice in the choir, right? And I believe the foundation of everyone doing their own dismantling, specifically of internalized racism, which has impacted, racism is a construct that's impacted everybody who's been born on this planet for X amount of years in a unique and also culturally reflected way. And so it's examining the impact of this construct on you.
Yep.
It's examining your personal relationship with racism, with benefiting or not benefiting from systems of oppression. And each one, capitalism, patriarchy, ableism, heteronormativism, you know, like,
Yeah.
And looking at your relationship with each of those things, I think is the foundation. Because what happens when you look at them is first you're like, fuck, I'm complicit. And then you look at why am I complicit? How? That was so not my intention.
Right.
Or at some point you get to a place where you're like, when was my consciousness hijacked?
Yeah, 100%.
When the fuck and how did this happen? And when you do that work, you then self-diagnose and prescribe your own medicines and you magnetize the resources and teachers and sets of curriculum that really walk you into a path of that is the path that is doing anti-racism work.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
Right? So that's the clearest thing in my system right now. Ask me 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks, 3 years, I will have a more deeply embodied and understood takeaway or understanding, you know, or, you know, I don't know that I'll ever have one definition, as I think we're moving away from such linear, constraining ways of being in relationship to things, everything, each other, ourselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. That is a really powerful response. And I feel that. I feel that completely. And, you know, when we talk about running a business, being an entrepreneur, you know, you working with people one-on-one to make money, you know, to thrive financially, to bring their gifts to the table, to stand in their worth, you know. And I have this direct experience with you and thinking of how powerful that is and wanting to charge X amount of money because guess what? I'm worth it, versus I want to be inclusive and I want to be accessible to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So I would love for you to speak on that.
Yeah. So coming from a marginalized perspective, being the embodiment of someone who should not be wealthy or thriving or in leadership or any of those things by the standards set by systems of oppression. To me, accessibility is also rooted in levels of consciousness and the having tiers of value that you're offering. That working one-on-one isn't always the most valuable thing to someone, especially if what they need is community, or especially if what they need is to be sort of have a more direct relationship with themselves and content and work that thing out. That accessibility has a lot to do with providing value in a multitude of ways, that the value that you're giving for free at a communal level, that freebie should ignite the person into then their next level of prosperity or self-awareness that leads to magnetizing the opportunities to X, Y, and Z, make more money, tap into the worthiness that cannot be obstructed or tampered with. Um, have an encounter that leads to being brought to a platform where there's exposure and whatever, you know, it, again, like obliterating this hierarchy of things, and especially attaching money to it in terms of I'm worth it, and so therefore I charge this, right? There are entrepreneurs making 6 figures a month off of ebooks and digital content, digital products that are under $10.
Yeah.
Right? So when it comes to awakened wealth consciousness, which is what I talk about, it is from the perspective of how am I providing value that layers upon itself and brings someone through to and through a transformation. And by the time that we're working one-on-one together, they're calibrated mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and financially to that.
Yeah.
And that I'm also confident that what I'm providing outside of this high ticket one-on-one realm are also equally valuable and are totally aligned with what that person needs in that moment. And that's why I have the tiers. And the tiers together create accessibility. The tiers together create accessibility, right? And I also want to point out where attaching money and our worth is where we get into, I charge this much because I'm worth it. That's a foundation of your awakened wealth consciousness. Yes. And at some point you realize that you could double or triple your current prices always. And there's always someone who will be able to afford that. And in addition to, your worth is so infinite that you could never charge it. You could never charge your worth, actually. So it's kind of an unsustainable wealth consciousness to lead from when it comes to pricing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, I think with like me taking a look at my business, the Get a Helmet community, my podcast guests, and just being like, you know, diversifying, wanting to be inclusive and diversifying who I am, you know, letting their voices shine through my platform.
Yeah.
Of course, I've always felt that way. And, you know, something that I've talked with you about before of like, where do we get in this tricky space of like forcing it versus it just being what happens naturally?
Right.
And I, you know, this is like, I know something that you've been thinking a lot about, and I would never, ever want to like go to a Black person and then be like, cool, Caroline, like, I see what you're doing, you know, like that would feel like shit. I don't want to be that person. I don't want them to feel that way. Or, you know, a gay person, I mean, any marginalized community. And so it's like, how do I go about wanting to add more voices of color and people different from me to my community, you know, without being forcing it?
You purify your motivation. Because right now, what you're reflecting is a conversation that's happening for a lot of people, internal conversation and dialogue of what you don't want to do, the harm you don't want to cause, the fear that you have of causing it, and all of those things are motivating your actions. And that's not a pure motivation and space from which diversity and inclusion comes from.
Yeah.
Right? I, right now on my roster, have masculine of center, lesbian, couple white girls, white women, excuse me, a trans man. And I don't necessarily market explicitly to any one type of person, except for the heart-centered CEO whose business so happens to be their higher calling in life. And me knowing all the little pieces of that. And because of my life experience, being marginalized, my soul's choice to incarnate marginalized as fuck, intersectional as fuck, does give me a unique perspective on things. And I think if you find that your perspective and the hijacking of your consciousness by a racist system has limited your experience with other people, your accessibility to other people, then that's the first place to challenge things at a personal level before you are holding your business accountable for that work.
Exactly. And that's basically what you said before,
Yeah.
where to start. And
Yeah.
it's like in you, like,
Yes. And I'm sorry to cut you off.
it's all good.
And being willing to be wrong, be willing to handle if you cause harm well. And some of that emotional stamina and maturity and spiritual endurance comes from having a purified motivation that isn't rooted in self-consciousness, but rather higher self-consciousness. That's where it happens.
Yes, dancing in on my pillow chair here. Yeah, I mean, it's just been a really intense time. And kicking off 2020 with a little bit of a global pandemic,
Yeah.
kind of casual.
Yeah.
And slightly shifting the conversation to that, and like the state of everyone's like financial stability right now, and people are losing their jobs, and people are getting really scared, and money and the economy, and like getting back into the swing of things financially during this pandemic. Not really sure when it's going to quote unquote end, if it will, and all this discussion about like this new normal. And for entrepreneurs specifically, people that you work with, people that would come to you for coaching, getting back into that vibration of creation, of abundance during this fearful time.
So, humble brag, my clients are not out of the swing of things with their thriving in abundance. And people who are investing in thriving generally aren't coming from that consciousness either, right? Of how do I get back into the swing of things? Because you recognize that the swing of things isn't how much money is in your bank account, right? The swing of things is where you're presencing your values and allowing that to guide your business ethos and the offerings that you launch with respect to the socio-political climate, and with respect to your up-leveled impact leadership, with respect to the new set of core values that will shape how you launch, craft, market, launch, and receive financial exchange for that work. Right? So again, it's more drawing board, going back to that 0 point self.
The intention
Motivated by your values, which have been influenced by the things that have happened, that you now have new levels of awareness, maybe boundaries, maybe intentions, maybe sense of self or purpose because of, so for those people, whoever that are feeling like, how do I get back into the swing of things? Look at what worked before that felt good when it came to how you were making money, how much money you were making, how you felt making that money, and look at also the shadow side, the costs that perhaps have had to be denied because of where there was an active structure in place that we had not had a break from since the 17th century, damn near, that allowed you to not have to be somewhere longer than your own home life, not be at a job longer than your own home life, or not need to dedicate more time to your work and your doing than your being, right? And really just taking the time to examine, again, who are you? Where are you in the path of complete least resistance to making the amount of money that also lights you up to make? And are you willing to then also make the adjustments that are a part of that frequency of wealth creation and
That
doing
willingness.
it awake? And are you willing? Are you willing? You know, I think my clients, one of the most blessed spaces to hold is that moment, that tipping point moment when they're like, I'm not seeing a breakthrough in my business. I'm only seeing personal breakthroughs. And that little moment of discomfort, right, of being so much more meaningful for the first time than their business is. And rewiring where business is supposed to be in devotion to your evolution. And your evolution is expressed through your business.
Trying to get that massage.
Now that time it was a piece of Palo Santo, chat.
Okay.
I'm like, I got the Palo, I got the lighter, I got the coffee, I got the massager.
Got it all.
I know, and then I got the hand movements, and so then things are tipping out. And this is, you know, I'm just clearing. It's fine.
We've got some energy moving around. It's good. The altar of the podcast.
Casual.
It reminds me of the video that you posted a long time ago that I told you that I watch all the time and I send to everyone. And that, like, you know, to dream big, to step into your worth, to practice so that you are aligned and in your worth and in your body, and to sit in grounded, like, anticipation of all that's coming your way, but to bask in that sense.
Yes. And even to have, it's a willingness to have that much faith. And it's a willingness to also have to, like, cross paths with your skepticism and your doubt and your deeper levels of self-questioning and your own ulterior motives that are sort of attached to the achievements that you have set as goals in your business. All of those things are part of it. You know, it is that willingness, I feel, that precedes surrender, that then creates the conditions for faith to then trigger the trust, to then trigger the clarity, to then trigger the, right? So it's a little bit of a process. It's you being willing to move yourself through that alchemical fire, right? To get to know where your lead is while also not renouncing or denouncing your gold. You know, it's being able to, again, it goes back to having that full spectrum, being able to have that radical acceptance for your 3D perspective, your 4D perspective, and your 5D perspective. And appreciate that your overall higher self-consciousness is constituted of all of those being in alignment with each other because of your self-acceptance.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, like, how do you personally get to that space, that willingness, that level of faith? And I think radical acceptance felt like the answer. Is there something else?
I think I get right with where I'm going to be challenged. I get right with my limitations before I'm confronted with them, so that when I'm confronted with them, it all makes sense. It's not some sort of false evidence appearing real, right? Fear, that acronym for fear. It is a part of the process that I anticipated, and that I have the skills, support, capacity, willingness to deal with. You know, I think it's like when we try to curate the mess, that we are off base. You're off base. You clean mess. You don't curate it. We're not romanticizing our grief. We are at the altar of devotion to its intelligence. And that hard month that I had just in May brought me to a very, I just want to say I could not bullshit myself if I tried. And that's a part of what grief, like the angelic component of grief, is that you cannot bullshit yourself, you know? And I think that with everything that's shifting and changing and moving, some of us are having a hard time acknowledging our grief for where things are changing, for what has changed, for where we need to change, for the grief that we have around having to make those changes in the first place because we were betrayed or hijacked or misinformed or had to go at it alone and didn't have the support or the teaching or the learning that we needed. But also looking at the high holy potentiality of reconciling with all of that and being so clear that we're no longer individually, collectively, as communities, as a global community, operating on top of unexpressed, unacknowledged grief.
Yeah. And embracing the quote unquote mess, the human experience.
And learning from it. Yes, like really being brought through the curriculum of its teaching. Really, really, really. Which also is the purpose of life that capitalism, patriarchy, racism has disconnected us from at a generational level. And it's so obscured because of the way in which these systems have been passed down in the family, within our families, and compounded through media and the education system specifically, to where there's some no wonder energy. No wonder this is confusing. No wonder I have grief. No wonder I'm not quite clear. No wonder my body feels excited for a new normal, but my head feels completely overwhelmed by needing to calibrate to a system that I can't even predict or control, or I don't know how to have the self-esteem to feel a meaningful part of reconstructing, of building, of contributing to. So therein lies, when it comes to like decolonizing wellness or just decolonizing in general, it's like going back to this idea of I am because we are. It's not personal development, it's collective evolution. It's I do my personal work because I know I am a valued member of the collective and my presence has an impact. And so I care so deeply about being a beneficial presence that I do the inner work, whatever it entails, consists of, requires of me. I'm willing because I have a sense of self-esteem around my role as a part of the whole, and vice versa, right? And that is really like the starting point to, I think, the greater depth of work that each of us are at an individual and collective altar.
Yeah, and it comes back to that willingness. And
it does.
You know, it's been, I told you this the other day, but it's been like an honor and to see you speak on these panels and bring this level, bring the rich witch herself, Dez Davis, to the table. Like I will never forget one of our first conversations, you just being like, bring the seat at the table energy, you know?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And I'm like, what does that mean? You know? And now I'm like, oh, I got it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and just like awareness is everything, you know? So opening yourself to awareness and, you know, just, I was texting you, like seeing you have these conversations in like from such an embodied place, from such a grounded place, but it's also from such a humbled place. It is that willingness. That's what it feels like to watch. And yeah.
Thank you for saying that. I appreciate that reflection. It certainly is the intent of my prayer work. Um, and thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think I was saying this to you that, it's so empowering as someone who has struggled with self-worth and with confidence and body image. And that is where I create from those experiences. And I can feel into people being like, holy shit, how do you just show up like that? How are you that confident, or blah, 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 blah. And just being like, the intensity and the healing to witness it in someone else heals us all. So just kind of like being able to feel into that
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
others,
Yeah.
and how helpful it was for me to watch on my journey. But there's so much going on. There are so many things that you're doing. What are you most excited about that's coming up that you want to share?
What I'm most excited about that's coming up. Well, I am now doing the one-on-one private mentorship work and a lot more community-based one-to-many type of things. So depending on when you're listening to this, you'll want to check out what I'm doing as either public speaking or some sort of a community thing that you can be involved in. But I'm really excited about the new dynamic of work that is kind of seeding and pollinating everything that I'm involved in right now, which is supporting a new generation, the emerging generation of impact leaders, heart-centered impact leaders who understand the technology of leveraging wealth to impact communities locally and globally, in purpose-driven ways and in a way that evolves holy life on earth. It feels delicious to be able to sort of come out of the woo-woo closet, all of us, and need to really embrace the spiritual growth and maturity that's happening for humanity right now. And where, for those who have been able to prosper within this system, had to have some reconciliation to do. There's some real stuffing down and some self-repression and some internalization that had to go into being successful and able to really thrive within that matrices. And so because of that, there is this respite and recovery that's happening for some of the people who we have been in leadership relationship with. They're going into respite and recovery. And there's this emerging generation of leadership that's coming through that I feel humbled and honored to work with and to be in service of and to. So I think that that's like the most accurate way, timeless way of answering your question right now. Certainly there are things and ways to work together one-on-one, to be a part of any community initiative or group work that I might be offering. But it's what I'm most excited about is just the texture and dynamic of the work that's coming through, backdropped by this breaking open that we're seeing on the planet right now, and where that just like it's like a new canvas and more colors on the palette than before that feel really exciting to explore and express and embody. That's what I'm really excited about right now.
Yeah, it's really exciting. It's like tying it all back into how we open this with the quote and kind of the breaking open and the breaking free from these ways of living, quote unquote, of existing, of being, that are accepted by society, that are embraced and put up onto a pedestal, and to just bringing awareness to that, to understand that those are, that's there's not one way to be. There's not one way to live, to look like, to express. There's just not. And that awareness, and that some people are at the very beginning of that awareness, and others are like, hello, like you know, I've been living this, I've been feeling this forever, and how we're all kind of having to give each other grace for where we're at on that spectrum and start from where we're at, you know, to move forward.
100%. And also being able to, again, going back to willingness and tying the willingness to this full spectrum of consciousness and development and awareness that we're all on. It's like, are you willing to have the tough moments with somebody who's on the opposite end of the spectrum of you? Like you might have more willingness for someone who's side by side and right where you are on the spectrum. And that speaks to the grace that you just talked about, is and ties in the willingness for things to not have to be easy, for things to not have to come from most convenient or where path of least resistance doesn't mean challenges don't come up. Right?
And no matter what, you will be okay with you.
No matter what, you will not only be okay, but where crossing these thresholds are a part of you really, really being okay. You're already not okay with all this shit in your system, all of us. Right? And so again, the lens through which we do this work cannot just be survival. Right? It cannot come from the unsustainable perspective of self-consciousness. It has to come from higher self-consciousness, which means we develop the willingness to be wrong, to cause harm and make it right, to confront what we've learned and unlearn it, to be charged sometimes in our lineage with being the most awakened one, quote unquote. And I use that term in the most originally intended way that it could be. Right? I do not mean it in terms of you're awakened and so therefore better than.
Right.
Child, I feel like the more aware I become, the more able I am to respond, which is responsibility. My ability to respond becomes more profound, more tangible. And so I then become naturally more magnetically attractive to things that can be resolved and reconciled within the field of awareness that I'm operating in. So, you know, again, going back to sort of this space of peace, joy, happiness, these are such radiant states of consciousness that we experience in our most embodied state as children, which has sort of this parallel understanding to innocence, and where our innocence plays a role in this work, not as a fallback for why you're full of shit in your denial and complicit in keeping it there, right? But it is recognizing that life wants to live more life. And when something challenges your survival, your life, if it's shame, loss, death, embarrassment, humiliation, these are the rejection, abandonment, these are the things that emotionally feel like death and are intrinsically tied into white people's experience of what's happening right now. Differently than BIPOC experience, which is more physically focalized and experienced. It's not just this emotional thing that's happening. And so that's why we do have to really go back and be real radically honest, and where causing what I want to say, and I hope that I can, you know, when something's channeling through and you want to connect these dots strong, let me give it a good go, which is where I do caution around performative allyship and where it leads to manufacturing exhaustion that is like this manufactured exhaustion that tries to rival with the true lethal experience of being marginalized in the world, to be careful around that shit. That you don't perform your allyship so much that you put yourself in positions of emotional danger or exhaustion that you then can fall back on as a reason why you need to nurture yourself over the collective. And
taking full responsibility for your well-being.
That's right, for your well-being, doing this work. Because again, I am because we are, right? We are because I am. And so I take care of myself because I value the collective being taken care of. Because the collective is being taken care of, I take care of myself, and I'm in touch with the unique ways in which myself is asking to be cared for. And it's not through the fragility of one's ego and through self-consciousness and how I might be perceived, and I don't want to cause, and I don't want to do, and I don't want to, and I don't want to, is not a sustainable motivation, will cause and catalyze performative allyship, and you won't even fucking know.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. You know, noted. I feel like all of these words are landing in all of the cells of my body. And they need to dance around for a little while.
Yeah.
They need to move together, and it's like taking that time, you know, taking that time to integrate and stillness.
Yes.
You know, being
yes.
stillness with yourself and your experience, which again kind of fights against the capitalistic, like hustle like vibe. So this is the first time where the universe is literally like, sit down, be with you.
And be with each other.
Be with each other.
And be with each other. Yes.
Yeah. Beautiful. Woo!
Ooh. Well, where can we exhale?
I know, like story of my life. Where can we hear more from you? Where can we see all of the Rich Witch things?
Absolutely. So website, www.therichwitchlife.com. Instagram @_therichwitch_.
Beautiful.
And those are sort of my online domains at the moment.
It's beautiful. It's potent. I am here for
It's
it.
a simple genius.
Yes.
You know, it's a time that like the witch in the woods ain't so hard to find. You know what I'm saying?
Woo! Yes, that is a good note to end on for sure. I was so excited for this conversation, and I'm ready for it to sink in a little deeper and to listen back to it and for everyone to hear this. And so I just thank you so much.
Thank you for having me again. I appreciate you, especially at this time.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There's so much to absorb and so much to do and so much to learn. And the more that we can kind of openly talk about this, every single person on this planet, and just like move through it together, the better it will be. Listening to people.
100%. And listening to people. And if that becomes difficult, do your work. Listen to yourself and be willing to hear what's making it so difficult to listen to others, because that will put you in right relationship with your capacity to have it all, to do it all. And that is ultimately what we are all here to express and to let free. As a part of our getting free is our letting free. So I appreciate you so much. Who you are, how you are, what you are offering in the world and to the world at this time. And for your willingness to do the brave work that creates a safe space in your business. And I just love and adore you and respect you and honor you, and thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So much love right on back.
Received.